Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Show. I'm your host, Ian Hartz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down a ton of actually fantasy relevant news. That's right. Training camp season is finally here, and we got some fun mock drafts to do later based on where you might feel like taking a quarterback. So joining me on this lovely Wednesday morning, none other than Fantasy Life's finest and just all-world brew master, Chris Allen. What's going on, Chris?
Actually, I just brewed yesterday. I've got a brewing competition here in a few weeks.
You are an award-winning brewmaster. I did not make that up.
No, that is true. But no, like I said it yesterday, and I'll pat myself on the back for being right about. Well, I'm right about two things. Well, I will be right about Hayden Hurst being like the tight end that you need for this season. Okay, I know I'll be right about that. But then two, what I said yesterday when we introed the show, bro. Like it's going to be like we're just going to be reacting to everything that comes out from beat writers to the media to whatever, like from now until February. And lo and behold, 24 hours later, we are just like hit with this massive wave of holdouts, injuries, just everything, like coach speak, all of that stuff. And so, but like I said, like this is it from now until February. But man, let's go ahead and dive into it, bro.
Yeah, what are we waiting for? The news. Let's get to it. All right, guys, we are going through 5 key items, and then I'll kind of list off the rest. But yeah, a lot went down in the NFL world yesterday. By the end of today, all 32 teams will be reported to training camp. So truly a great time to be digesting some of this news. Some of it coach speak, some of it, nonsense. Some of it maybe not nonsense. That's what we are here to figure out. So kicking things off, Chris, Fantasy's rating wide receiver 1 CeeDee Lamb will not be reporting the Cowboys training camp on Wednesday. Now, not exactly the first time the Cowboys have seen one of their star players do this. Ezekiel Elliott and Zach Martin famously also held out during training camp and then eventually became the highest paid players at their respective positions. So, Chris, really it has been a waiting game for guys like CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk. Not only seeing guys like Justin Jefferson get a bag, but I mean, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, the overqualified wide receiver 2s of the world have also already been getting paid throughout this long offseason. So, any concern here about CeeDee, being someone that, again, could be holding out for a while? Because personally, man, just seems like this is typical Jerry Jones Cowboys tactics, and I'd be surprised if we go more than a week or two before CeeDee is right back there as Dak's number 1 wide receiver and probably a top 2 pick in most fantasy drafts.
No, I'm very concerned. Because like, aren't you worried about Racey McMath taking over for CeeDee Lamb like right out of the gate? Like I'm concerned that Kevontae Turpin is the guy that they drafted, that they brought in order to take over. No, man, there's no way that this offense doesn't function without CeeDee Lamb. When it was him and Amari Cooper, like 2 seasons ago, they were kind of splitting the targets about 18, like 16, 17, 18%, somewhere between the two of them. And they were dealing, with Dak Prescott, like hucking them the ball and all of that. But then as soon as Amari leaves, like for Cleveland, we see the CeeDee Lamb that we thought we were going to get, like coming out of college. Not just in the fact that he took over the target share. He quickly jumps from that 18% target share up to about 28, and we just saw him crest 29 last season. But also the fact that he was able to move, not just for playing inside like that power slot, that like big slot like type of role, but also moving outside and being the team's, I wouldn't say X receiver because he still had Michael Gallup to him, and happy trails to Mr. Gallup after he just retired yesterday, put in his paperwork, good for him. But like we saw CeeDee actually play both roles and play it well. To the point where he was now excelling from a yards per route run standpoint, not just from the interior, but outside. Like he is that team's wide receiver 1. So I don't see anybody else like that kicking there on the roster. It's not like we've seen much about Jalen Tolbert. Brandon Cooks is getting into the twilight of his career. There's nobody that can do on that team what Lamb can do. So no, I have no concerns about it. Jerry Jones knows what he has in CeeDee Lamb, so I would expect a deal for him shortly. So for fantasy purposes, like, no, I'm not worried at all.
League high 179 targets last season, truly the engine of this Cowboys offense. So current streak of 13 games with at least 100 receiving yards and or a touchdown. If you just want to go through every single wide receiver in the NFL and say who, is just easily checking the boxes of talent, your quarterback, just the overall scoring upside of your offense, and then the lack of target competition. Yeah, that's why you do have CeeDee Lamb as your wide receiver one. And I love to call out, Chris, of just the multitude of ways that the Cowboys have used Lamb specifically last season. I know a lot of people were actively worried about, moving on from Kellen Moore to Mike McCarthy as a play caller, but you pull up some of those next gen stats, route tree charts that are so cool. And man, it really reminds me of like those old National Geographic mazes where it's just everywhere in the slot, out wide, short, deep, intermediate. CeeDee Lamb attacks all three levels of the field, and he's pretty freaking good at doing it. So don't think he'll quite get that Justin Jefferson money, but yeah, sure seems like 30 million plus is on the way, likely here soon. All right, now not a holdout going on in Cincinnati, but your Bengals got, I don't want to say a running back battle, Chris, but we do have two new guys who should be taking on quite a bit of work in the absence of Joe Mixon, who got traded to the Texans this offseason. That's right, it is Chase Brown hype season, everybody. First, we had Bengals head coach Zach Taylor say that there is a big emphasis on Chase Brown's role, quote unquote. I think he's earned that. I think he's worked the right way. He's what we hope we were drafting. Now, a little bit of a cold water, I guess, from the GM, Duke Tobin, believes that Chase Brown actually should have a bigger role. But man, this is the typical like offseason stuff here. His quote was he's going to have an opportunity to be the guy or the second guy or in tandem with Zach Moss. Shocker, Chris. Chase Brown could be the RB1 or the RB2 or maybe the RB1A or 1B in Cincinnati. So not a big surprise here. But again, I think the bigger story here is just the constant drumbeat throughout the offseason of the Bengals being pleased with Chase Brown's development. The question is if he can just make it through these next few weeks without them adding a legit third down pass blocking running back a la Samaje Perine of the world, because that's the issue, man. No one's doubting Chase Brown's explosiveness. We've all seen the 22-mile-per-hour run on that screen against the Colts and everything, but he only stayed in the pass block on 8 total reps last season. And when you do look at some of these, Chase Browns, Jaleel McLaughlin's of the world, these are the sort of players that do typically stand out in shorts during July. Are you buying Chase Brown hype, Chris?
I'm buying it, but at the same time, like the hype for him, it really is based off of that one swing pass. And I'm gonna put it to you like this: I will ask you, like, you could have done that same swing pass, right? You could have taken that to the house. I feel like any one of us could have probably done the same thing. Just it was so like in wide open space, and all he had to do was hit top speed as quickly as possible. Not to take anything away from his athleticism, but just given the context of that particular reception, I feel like a lot of us could have gone out and done that. I would have popped my Achilles, but you're a little bit younger than me. I feel like you could have made it harder. But either way, after just
Chris,
44 attempts last season.
Chris, the problem is I dropped the ball. I played defense for a reason. Man. Maybe I could have planned that far, but I'm dropping that thing, man. Butterfingers.
You probably would have. Yeah, you would have dropped it. You could have gotten to top speed quicker, though. That's all. That's it. Like the problem with Chase Brown after just 44 attempts is how much folks forget the potential for him being a workload type of the back. Like when he was still at Illinois, like he had just about like 70% of the carries like in his final season. Also like about like 8 to 9% of the targets. So he can function like as that RB2. But really the question is, can he pull it all together in this offense that relies on versatility? They wanted, like they have had Joe Mixon in the past to be that power back when they need somebody to get the short yardage like type of runs. They also need somebody that needs to be able to operate in space. That's why they've mixed in in the past, but when they had Giovanni Bernard there for a while, and they've mixed in some of the, even Samaje Perine when they were making the playoff runs. But of course, the most critical portion is somebody that can do those pass blocking reps. And that was part of the issue that that Brown had last year. Hopefully his technique is improved this year. But overall, it's just, what is that running game going to look like? Now, of course, stylistically, the fit for Zach Moss does really help him, like with what we expect them to do from a blocking standpoint. But I think overall, the hope is that with Joe Burrow being, let's say, fully healthy for this training camp, which would be a first for him since getting to Cincinnati, is if they can start to integrate the running concepts into their entire offense. The problem that we've seen out of the Bengals like slow starts over the past like 3-4 years is that the passing game looks okay, especially with Burrow operating it. You got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd for however many years. Of course, that passing game like can get off to a rocky start, but still look good. But it's the fact that they haven't been able to integrate their running game until week 5, week 6, week 7. It's been part of the issue. I mean, Burrow hasn't played much under center, but we saw last year after Jake Browning went down, the running game did become a bit more efficient. They were running like more under center concepts. Joe Mixon's success rate and his EPA per rush actually did increase like after Joe Burrow went down. So now if you do have a full offseason of Joe Burrow playing and actually first seeing proof of concept last year, like while he was standing there on the sidelines and watching Joe Browning do his thing and like the rest of the team like trying to figure it out like without him on the field, he was able to see like how the offense should operate, what Zach Taylor like wanted to do with Joe Burrow. And so now if he has the full season to really implement that, and we see more of how like the passing concepts now can work as well, like with the running game, that sequencing that is so like critical to like offenses being more efficient. Like this could be the way that Browning gets himself on the Brown rather, not Browning, but Brown gets himself on the field more because he can be that guy that is explosive. And we've seen that in spurts in the past. So I believe it. I think there is a chance for him to make it. He's a good compliment to Zach Moss. And I think where he's being drafted right now on Underdog and other sites, I think it really does like speak to the nature that we expect him to be that RB2. And I think he has the talent to do it.
Love to shout out to some of the things that he did at Illinois from a workload perspective. I got to stream with Davis Maddock yesterday. You know, obviously really sharp guy. You guys should go check him out. But yeah, I mean, he actually pointed out that not only did he have that big workload at Illinois, was also the third highest graded pass blocker in college coming out. So yes, last year wasn't able to get those opportunities, but he's 5'9", 209 pounds, man. Like Zach Moss is probably only carrying about 10 more pounds on his frame as well. So I'm not completely throwing away Moss just because of this one bit of news. This was, you know, the reigning RB5 in next gen stats, rushing yards over expected. But at a minimum, Chris, it does seem like this should be a situation that we are firmly expecting a 1A, 1B approach. And with the prices right now, man, I think it's hard to say that, you know, Chase is anything other than undervalued. ESPN Chase Brown pick 141, going behind J.K. Dobbins, Zach Charbonnet, Trey Benson, like pure handcuff type of plays. Meanwhile, we have Zach Moss going as a top 100 pick, more so alongside Raheem Mostert and Najee Harris, which I think is fine. But yeah, we should be seeing Chase Brown get a bit closer to that 120 range with the potential to have this role in the slim, shady / Joe Burrow led Bengals experience right now. So good stuff there. Now a little bit more trouble in paradise, specifically San Francisco. We got some wide receivers that aren't exactly living their best lives at the moment. Brandon Ayuk, first of all, is not overly happy about his contract situation, but he still reported to camp, and he got general manager John Lynch to give him a bit of an endorsement, saying they will keep working on a deal for Ayuk. Quote, Brandon's a big part of our team, and we expect he will be this year. Pretty similar sentiment from the 49ers the entire offseason, Chris. They don't need to trade Brandon Ayuk. They don't need to extend him right now. They could even choose to franchise tag him next year should they desire to do so. That said, we've seen guys like Nick Bosa with the 49ers get big money deals after just a bit of a prolonged period. And Deebo Samuel not that long ago openly requested a trade as well, wound up getting paid as well. So with Ayuk, I mean, ESPN's highest rated receiver from last year, PFF's second best receiver. You guys have watched the man. He is truly one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And yeah, Chris, I think he's going to be paid pretty soon. So if anything, man, if you had any hesitations about this, Ayuk reporting to training camp, man, should be all we need to know and should be everything we need to feel good about drafting this man as at least a top 15 player at the position. But then, Chris, I look at some of the current ADP, and yes, it is in best ball land, but still, Ayuk and Deebo have now flipped. Ayuk is wide receiver 16, Deebo is wide receiver 13. If any of you guys out there are crazy enough to be drafting right now like Chris and I, buy the dip. Come on. He's playing. He's going to be great this year. Am I crazy, Chris?
No, you're not crazy at all. Brock Purdy, if you have any doubts, or if the 49ers even have any doubts about Brock Purdy, then they need to be signing Brandon Ayuk immediately, or like as soon as possible. Brock Purdy threw 88 explosive passes like last season. Ayuk was responsible, was on the other end of 37 of those, like almost 40% of the explosive plays or explosive passes that Brock Purdy committed last season went to Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk's like has a 14-yard 8 out like last season. Deebo Samuel's at 7. Like he's what makes this 49ers passing game work. I mean, Deebo Samuel is good for what he is, right? He was that wide back or whatever position that they were talking about like a couple of years ago. I mean, great for doing stuff out of the backfield, excellent after the catch. Same thing for George Kittle, same thing for Christian McCaffrey. But if you need explosives, if you need to be able to push the ball downfield, chunk games, if you want a guy that can match up against the opposing defense's number one corner, win in contested catch situations, Brandon Ayuk checks all of those boxes. And we saw that like last season. We saw that when you would try and put Deebo Samuel like on the outside or have him go up against like tougher corners, like he would, like his yards per route one would start to fail. Not the case like for Brandon Ayuk. So if we want to see Brock Purdy still succeed, and then of course we'll have is Brock Purdy a franchise quarterback? Should he be getting paid commensurate with the should he get the whatever Tua winds up getting, since we were having that conversation yesterday, or should he get the Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow? Like, should he get that deal next year? If Brock Purdy was as good as his numbers say he was, and he was top 10 in air yards per attempt, completion percentage over expected EPA per play, I mean, everything. I mean, he was one of, I think, 3 quarterbacks that was top 10 in like two of those metrics. If he is everything that the metrics say that he is, then he has to have a guy like Brandon Ayuk on the squad. So the 49ers, like, they have to do this, like, unless there's another guy like waiting in the wings in order to do that, and I don't see it.
Legit top 5 real life wide receiver talent, and not much worse in fantasy. It just comes down to that volume. FantasyLife only projects him for 110 targets. Guys like Drake London, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr. should clear 130 fairly easily. So our consensus wide receiver 13 in our old rankings, and your boy Ian is the highest on Brandon Ayuk. So again, it might be a few less targets, but certainly think he's good enough to make the most out of them. And then also just another note on these 49ers wide receivers, but Ricky Pearsall is currently starting things off on the non-football injury list because he injured his hamstring during a non-team organized activity. So already someone that we were not exactly expecting to be going out there getting a ton of run, because we got Ayuk, we got Deebo, and guys, Jawan Jennings is a sort of freaking badass blocker that is not going to be taken off the field for a small reason. And yeah, so Ricky Pearsall drafted in the first round, I get it, but just again, someone that I think was far more likely to see a 50, 60%, sort of route rate as opposed to the every down roll in an offense that loves to keep, their 2 running backs on the field, specifically Kyle Juszczyk and of course our one true 101 CMC. So with Pearsall, again, not hating on the guy, but even some of the whole, like, this is the perfect wide receiver for the 49ers because he can win against man coverage. I just feel like that's a little overrated. Like, okay, he's good at it, don't get me wrong, but what was the issue last year? I don't think it was that. Watch the freaking last play the 49ers had on offense, and you'll see Brandon Ayuk break wide open in man-on-man coverage. The problem was the offensive line couldn't block Chris Jones long enough for Purdy to even get the ball out. So Pearsall, good talent. Yeah, we want more wide receivers and everything, but was always someone that I thought being priced around Xavier Leggett and Jalen Polk, a bit overpriced, and wasn't going on my way to get him. So currently the wide receiver 67. Don't be surprised if that does drop quite a bit. Chris, let's talk some Tennessee Titans. We had some good stuff from Brian Callahan. And first of all, on these running backs, Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears really sitting in that RB3 range in drafts. And it sounds like it really is going to be, I don't even want to say 1A, 1B. I mean, they are looking like co-starters at this point, specifically from head coach Brian Callahan. They're both going to play quite a bit of football for us, and I don't view either one of them as a starter or a backup. They're both starting players to me. In June and April, offensive coordinator Nick Holtz basically echoed this sentiment, calling them interchangeable. 1A, 1B, they're both going to play a ton. So, Chris, looking at these guys, I mean, Pollard obviously let down some fantasy managers last year, but did play 18 games for the Cowboys, had over 300 touches, and coming off that knee injury, just didn't seem to have the same explosion. Not knee, he broke his leg against the 49ers, but either way, wasn't, an ideal season for him. But God forbid we get the pre-2023 version, which we did start to see more flashes of down the stretch. That was one of the better running backs in football. But on the other side of things, Tajay Spears, only one of 3 running backs with a PFF grade north of 70 in rushing, receiving, and pass blocking, broke more tackles per touch than any running back not named Jalen Warren. I mean, I'm pretty sure both these guys are good at football, Chris. The question is that worth anything when they're getting their volume eaten by each other? And let's face it, not exactly in the world's best offense when it comes to the offensive line and potentially scoring upside.
Yeah, that's a good point. The offensive line, Brandon Thorne, who does a lot of good work over at Establish the Run, has the Titans as his 24th ranked offensive line. So I would take that into context. But to your point, I mean, while Tony Pollard was a bit of a bust last season, just over 2 yards per route run as a receiver in 2022, 1.5 or 1.5 in 2021. So it's like 4th and 8th amongst all RBs. And of course, the year after he busted his leg, he was kind of in the dumps, like from a receiving standpoint. But if Brian Callahan brings like some of that usage for running backs, like as in the passing game, like down from Cincinnati, like down to Tennessee, where it's like been middling the pack in terms of targeting running backs. I think it's possible for both of them to kind of meet their ADP, because what you're spending in order to like actually acquire them, what, 10th, 11ish round, like somewhere in there. I mean, it's not as bad for trying to see like how that particular duo winds up breaking out. So at cost, I have been targeting more of Tajay Spears because he's the cheaper one, but either the way that it's sounding, they could make up some of their value, like from a PPR standpoint, depending on your league format.
Very good zero hero RB strategy types. And I will say, like, the real alert here is that if one of them goes down, the other guy probably becomes an instant RB1 considering their 3 down ability. So good stuff there. Don't hate the player, hate the ADP right now. I actually really happen to like these ADPs. So other note about Tennessee real quick is that Brian Callahan on his tight end room said it's not a room that's going to be dominated by one guy. We're going to fill the tight end role with a lot of different players as opposed to maybe just 1 or 2 guys like some teams do. So everyone that was maybe hoping for a bit of a post-hype breakout from Chigoziem Okonkwo. Yes, very efficient in his rookie year. Less so in the sophomore campaign. Not looking like he's going to have a ton of snaps or opportunities in 2024. And that really was consistent with what Callahan did with those Bengals tight ends as well. So again, not someone we were overly going out of our way to draft anyway, but would certainly, press the brake even a little bit more when looking at Chiggy in the later rounds. Guys also had some words on the quarterback battles out of Las Vegas. Antonio Pierce noted that they're not going to rush the QB1 decision. When it's clear and it's evident that we need to make the decision to move forward, they will. So experience will play into it. Look, it's Gardner Minshew versus Aiden O'Connell. I mean, this is the equivalent to, McLovin versus Muhammad from back in the day. Like, I'm not trying to be a dick here, but just in terms of completion percentage over expected, Chris, these were the 2 worst quarterbacks in the NFL. I cannot find an advanced stat that points to any of them being anything other than mediocre. So I know they kind of got shafted in the draft because the Falcons picked their guy earlier than they thought they would. But yeah, they are not good. We'll see who the Raiders end up picking. Perhaps the more fantasy relevant quarterback battle is coming out of New England. Head coach Jared Mayo said coming out of the spring, I think it's clear that Jacoby is the most pro-ready guy we have. That said, he did mention that Drake May, if he comes out here and he lights it up, and once again, it goes back to the quality of reps, it could absolutely happen. So yeah, got to give some respect to Jacoby Brissett, man. 8th best EPA per dropback and 3rd best completion percentage over expected over these past 2 seasons. And Washington last year, man, he had 5 meaningful drives and he led the offense to a touchdown in each and every one of them. He looked really good. So we already talked yesterday about Drake May. Again, another situation I don't think we need to overly linger on, but just realize, everybody, 23 of 29 quarterbacks drafted as a top 10 pick since 2010 went on to start 10 plus games. The only exceptions were Tua, Jared Goff, Anthony Richardson, Trey Lance, Patrick Mahomes, and Jake Locker. So not saying we couldn't see these guys get a couple starts under their belt, but similar to Minnesota, I think it's a matter of, when, not if Drake May is going to be taken over. Finally, guys, just want to run through some quick rapid fire notes from around the league. Packers head coach Matt LaFleur praises Marshawn Lloyd for being a weapon out of the backfield again. Also said A.J. Dillon, best shape he's ever seen him in, so cross that one off your offseason coach speak bingo card. Chiefs year. Deep ball is back. Yeah, I know, man. It's insane. Rashee Rice, Hollywood Brown shining. Kadarius Toney, RB reps, maybe the next coming of Cordero Patterson, Chris. Hey, if he's not being asked to catch the ball, maybe good things will happen. Alvin Kamara reported to training camp after some, murmurs about the contract not being what he wanted. Also posted a picture with Marshawn Lynch, maybe just here so he won't get fined. My most drafted running back, Antonio Gibson, starts off camp on the NFI list. I am officially sad. Broncos tight end Greg Dulcich expected to practice this week. We will believe it when we see it. Matthew Stafford back in training camp after getting a little bit more money. Tyler Higbee on the PUP list. You already mentioned happy retirement to Michael Gallup and OBJ starting on the PUP list, but Tom Pelissero stated that OBJ is working through some minor things, and this is just part of the plan for easing him back into football. Deep breath, and Chris, that was the news. So great stuff there. And again, we'll be going over this each and every day, but yeah, we're back. News is great. And it's also pretty great, guys. Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus is our new Fantasy Life Premium product where, again, we still have a free newsletter, free content. You're listening to us right now for free. Certainly still trying to give you guys all the tools you need without dipping into the wallet. But should you guys be in a bunch of leagues or just really want to take that extra step to make sure you dominate your friends and get that trash talking, advantage over them, we do recommend dipping your toes into the Fantasy Life Plus water. And hey, it's not even going to cost you all that much. Guys, I keep saying it's, less than a Chipotle burrito for our highest price package. And I keep saying it because it's true. All right, that's not bad. We've seen a lot more expensive stuff out there. And for the money you're using, man, you're getting so much cool stuff. All of our consensus rankings, our draft champion tool that we are just about to dive into after this message, and truly so much more. So again, Fantasy Life Plus, just trying to help you become a smarter fantasy football player. All right, Chris, I mentioned that we are getting into some of the cool stuff with Fantasy Life Plus. And with that, man, let's do it. Again, our draft champion tool is perhaps the coolest thing that I think that we are offering with the package, because we really give everyone the opportunity to go through and go ahead and do as many mock drafts as you want. And the customizable league settings, man, I cannot state enough about how great they are. So as you guys can see, shout out YouTube fam, podcast fam, don't worry, I'm going to be talking through everything here, but Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN, MFL, FFPC really let you customize what league settings you want. You're able to actually sync your specific league settings if you're not trying to go line by line. Again, just limitless options here. So we're going to do just a normal league, PPR scoring, snake draft, 12 teams, again, using the ESPN average draft position. So if you happen to think that Dwayne or Matthew Friedman or Matthew Berry are, the smart ones and you just hate me, good for you, because you can actually go ahead and just select their rankings and not worry about what I have to say. But different strategies, zero RB, hero RB, late round QB. You can pick if your opponents, what they're going to do. Again, keepers, there's just limitless options here. So, Chris, for our purposes today, though, we are going to be going through the mock draft and just basically seeing what some rosters look like, what the grades look like when we go with an early round QB, a middle round QB, or a late round QB. And we'll probably take, 2 in the middle and late rounds as well. So, with that, brother, let's get after it, starting things off with the early round QB. And Chris, just from your so far experience, I know we still got some bigger drafts to get going, but has there been an early round QB that you've specifically been targeting more than others so far?
It's been Lamar Jackson. That's been the guy that I've been targeting the most, and that's more or less based off of cost. Where his ADP, he slides behind Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and from a rushing perspective, we know that he's going to be up at the top of the league. Just last season, 24% rushing rate. That was ahead of both Hurts and Allen. Now, of course, for Hurts, you have to control for the injury that he sustained midway through the season. But if you need that rushing component for a quarterback to really hit that top 3 range of outcomes, Lamar, for the cost and also the dual threat ability, he kind of checks both those boxes for me if I'm going to go quarterback in the early rounds.
Speaking of early rounds, I went ahead and just took Bijan Robinson in round 1, pick 5, and Garrett Wilson in round 2. Takes us to round 3, where we have already seen Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson go off the board. So looking over at, again, one of our other cool Fantasy Life Plus features, our ADP tool, I can get an idea of where these quarterbacks are typically going. And yes, on ESPN, round 2, round 3 is really that sweet spot. So Jalen Hurts normally is going off the board, pick 32. This is about when you need to go and get your guys. So Patrick Mahomes is actually pick 28. So Chris, it really does come down to Jalen Hurts versus Patrick Mahomes. And for our purposes, 4-point passing touchdown league, I think our guy is Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I would agree with that there. I mean, he was just right behind Lamar, like I just mentioned, in terms of rushing rate. And then, of course, with the projected uptick in passing volume with Kellen Moore, we could see, Hurts has a shot at breaking the single season passing record, for the Eagles, which is famously held by Carson Wentz, which is hilarious. In my mind, I think it's just short of 4,100 yards. And I think Hurts was at 39 or something, 38, 39 last year. So if Kellen Moore brings to the table what we think he will, there's a shot that Hurts could be the guy, at least to reset that record.
And again, just I've talked about before, but the goal line rushing upside is truly different from any other guy out there. 16 rush attempts inside the 5-yard line last year. Josh Allen had 14. No other quarterback had more than 5. So again, it's one of those things where, yes, guys like Lamar, guys like Kyler, who you guys all know I love and everything, they certainly have their dual threat upside, but that goal line rushing usage is really what has made Allen and Hurts over these last few seasons just complete cheat codes in our lovely American pastime and known as fantasy football. So, all right, guys, I went ahead and just simulated the rest of the draft after, again, getting that early round QB. And as you can see, we have a cool feature where we actually rate your your draft. Got a B plus overall. And, one of my favorite parts is actually the position ranks where, yeah, with the quarterback and with the running back, because we got Bijan and Hurts early, we are really strong. But as you see, we are considered to have the 12th best wide receiver room. That's a dead last, so not ideal. And then also the tight ends are lacking a little bit. So the overall roster, again, Jalen Hurts, Bijan Robinson. We got DeAndre Swift a bit later, Garrett Wilson, Zay Flowers, Evan Ingram is our tight end one, Austin Eckler, and then, got some just various talents on the bench. So I really do think, though, Chris, this speaks to what generally you are sacrificing when going with the early round QB. I mean, the wide receiver cliff tends to come for everyone, man, around that round 7, round 8. So if you are using one of those early round picks on a Jalen Hurts, and I also want a hero RB in terms of Bijan Robinson, guess what? I'm probably not going to be able to get one of the top, 6 or 7 tight ends. Otherwise, I'm going to be really risking not getting the wide receivers that we are wanting in this situation. So I will say, again, not completely perfect strategy here. Like, I would have not taken Kirk Cousins if I already used an early round pick on Jalen Hurts. Also, don't think we needed 2 tight ends necessarily, but directionally, I think very good. And again, where you see these guys going based on the most updated ADP. So again, Chris, early round QB, something that I haven't been afraid of doing, but personally, like, I'm in my home draft, it's time to go. I prefer more of the, modest Anthony Richardson, maybe 2 rounds later. Ideally, and we'll find out if we can get him there in just a second, Kyler Murray in round 7 or round 8.
Yeah, those are the guys that if I can't get like the top, like elite quarterback, early round quarterback group, those are the guys that I'm trying to target, like Anthony Richardson, like Kyler, those guys that still provide like the rushing component, but still I'm not paying that early round cost in order to get it. Because your point is well taken. Because in the draft series that I've put out, drafting from each of the individual draft slots, I have noted like the opportunity cost that you're sacrificing in order to get a Jalen Hurts, to get a Patrick Mahomes, to get a Josh Allen. Because that wide receiver avalanche, that stuff is real, dude. Like, you are having to go through some heinous picks if you wind up getting an early round quarterback and an early round tight end, and you're foregoing some of those wide receivers that you might not think are like the number ones or like the best. I mean, Terry McLaurin in like the 3rd, 4th round, like, okay, fine. Like, maybe I might be able to get a different guy later. But then if you wind up passing on wide receiver early, and you're staring down the barrel of DeAndre Hopkins as like your second wide receiver, or looking at JSN or Tyler Lockett as your wide receiver, like 2 or something along those lines. It becomes a bit tougher to manage your league when your wide receivers aren't as strong as you really need them to be, especially if it's in a PPR type setting.
And again, guys, with all this, just the level of detail that we end up giving you to rate the draft, Matthew Freedman, just look at this freaking picture. That is absolutely amazing right there.
What a
drafted most like Freedman in this one. Dwayne and Rob not quite as high on our strategies. So, what if, again, because normally, if we had more time, you're doing your thing here, you're going pick by pick, but mentions how if we had taken T. Higgins in round 7 instead of Austin Eckler, we would have received an A-. Like, yeah, we wanted T. Higgins. Thanks a lot, automation. Right. Why we trusted you to pick the rest of the picks for us. Why would you do that? I feel like it's in a video game when you got to challenge a play. Like, why are you trying to screw me over, CPU, in the first place?
Right.
But top player, talks about the biggest values with it. And again, you have the ability to add your keepers and completely customize this to your league, just settings and everything. So that was early round QB. Again, maybe not our complete, favorite strategy, but again, I think the important thing here to remember is that any of these strategies can work. I think the important thing, Chris, is not specifically going into a draft and forcing it. Like, okay, if Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes weren't there, guess what? We're not going early round QB in that case.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the things that I stress a ton in my draft series, and what I try and do in every draft that I approach is I'm not locking myself into a strategy, especially in the early rounds where you have to take as many swings at the core positions, which is wide receivers and running backs, because what your chances of finding a starting running back in, let's say, or starting wide receiver rather, in rounds 10, 11, 12 is so much less than what you're capable of finding in rounds like 2, 3, and 4, or even like in round 1. Like the average fantasy points per game drops from, let's say, 21, 20 points per game all the way down into like the teens, like the low teens, like once you get into this like 7th, 8th, and ninth round. So by taking as many swings as we were talking about earlier, getting your Jamar Chases, getting your Devontae Smiths, like all of those guys early, you don't have to rely on this individual player hitting. You don't have to reach for a specific guy. And that's why early quarterback isn't where I'm particularly at, because I do want to try and build out a lot of those core positions early. But if I am, I'm trying that you can at least manage it by using some of our rankings and tiers, and also this like simulated tool in order to figure out who might be available depending on where your draft slot is.
Currently whizzing along through a few rounds in the draft just so we can get kind of to the quarterback place. Tyreek Hill, Devin Achane, Drake London, and Brandon Ayuk through the first 4 rounds. And if that sounds like wild wide receiver value to you guys, you're not wrong, but truly Drake London is actually like unironically a 3rd round pick on ESPN drafts. So that is one of the bigger, discrepancies I know that we see between, ESPN, which again, at this point doesn't have a bunch of money in them, versus drafts like FFPC, underdog leagues, people are more actively using it. So Jalen Waddle, Malik Neighbors is an absolutely massive value, in these streets as well. So yeah, I'm going to take advantage of it and hopefully get a good grade, from AI Ian and everyone else going through it. So that's rounds 5 and 6. We'll probably take, Neighbors again. Screw it. Let's go to wide receivers, Chris, and then hopefully it'll just automate everything else. But that is through, let's see, the first 6 rounds. And now as I look at the quarterbacks, went a little bit earlier than I was hoping for. Kyler Murray, someone that I was hoping was going to be there. I can scroll down to the draft board and see that, I got sniped by the CPU 1 pick before with Kyler Murray. But, man, okay. If Kyler had been there in round 6, for this purpose, we definitely would have taken him. But Kyler Murray and Jordan Love in round 6, to me, like that is pretty great value when you see guys like CJ Stroud and Dak Prescott going up in the round 4 and round 5. Again, the discrepancy, like I really do believe that Josh Allen and Hurts, they deserve to be going in this round 2, round 3 range. And you can make your case for Lamar and Mahomes. But after that, man, all due respect to Richardson and what he brings to the table as a dual threat, I'd say after that group, man, it's Kyler and Jordan Love, Dak and Burrow and Stroud. Like just the way, to me, that's like one big tier, more or less. And I'm even higher on Kyler. But to see Jordan Love, who was outperforming, what was he, the QB freaking 5 by the end of last season? Like one of the best fantasy quarterbacks out there, going on average 3 rounds or 2 rounds after guys like Dak Prescott, like CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, not going that far in front of him. I think this middle pocket, man, with the ability to, again, really build up those RB and wide receiver rooms before, to me, it's been my preferred strategy of the offseason.
Right, because you are able to address the core positions. You're getting your, at the very least, 1 starting running back and just a slew of wide receivers thereafter. Because depending on where you play at, of course, we've got ESPN where it's just 2 wide receivers. But if folks are playing over on Yahoo, where you might have to start 3 or whatever your league settings are, like most folks are trying to at least lock into those receivers as early as possible. And if you want to take that detour to elite tight end, which I have been going more for this year because I want to get my shots at Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid, less on Kyle Pitts, but that's a whole other thing. But like all of those other guys, like the elite tight ends that might be available early, like I want those guys, but I don't want to have to take both an elite tight end and an elite quarterback. But if I can still get a lot of those points, like from the mid-round quarterbacks, like a Kyler Murray, like a Jordan Love, guys that all have top 6 ceilings on a weekly basis, like if I can build out my roster, have most of my starters in place, like throughout my squad, and then tack on a quarterback that also has top 6 upside, dude, I'll take that like 9 times out of 10 for sure.
As you YouTubers can see, I got a bit cocky here with some of my wide receiver overdrive, and accordingly, our RB2 is Antonio Gibson, which is, one of the more scary things that anyone can say while managing a football team. So that's right, Chris. Whoops. So we're just going to load up on handcuffs and hopefully, not hopefully a couple guys get injured, but it's more of a reality that a few guys will get injured and we will go from there. So have a feeling
like
we're going to be
Braylon Allen, like all those guys that we got this. Yeah, we totally, it'll be fine.
have a feeling that we're going to be going 12 out of 12 here in terms of the running back rankings. But again, if we are going to have a weakness somewhere, I prefer to have a superpower elsewhere. So wide receivers first and dead last in the rest of the position ranks. So again, probably if you have to go down to Jaden Daniels, to me, that's about the last guy that I do feel comfortable not needing a second quarterback with. Again, would have preferred, especially for the purposes of what we're doing here, to have gotten, a Kyler Murray or a Jordan Love in round 6. I think that would have better done the point because those are the guys that we're looking more towards in the middle round. So again, just clicking around, please don't overly dive into the specifics with some of these later round picks. But again, to me, Chris, loading up on the wide receivers early, getting that hero RB, and then also just being willing to, go in there and finally, get your tight ends when you need. I like the middle round QB strategy, I must say.
Yeah, and I think for you, to your point, this tool really highlights
Look who loved it.
how.
Look who loved it.
Look at that! Look at that guy with the Ohio State quarter zip on and everything. But this is what this tool allows you to do in seeing. All right, well, if I'm gonna start hammering wide receivers late, and I'm kind of pushing RB2, what are my realistic chances of getting a solid running back? And one of the functions for the draft champion tool is you can run it back. You can go back at 2 or 3 picks and say that, all right, well, if I should have, instead of taking this wide receiver here, what if I took this running back there? All right. And start to build up my stable that way. So I don't have to rely on Antonio Gibson as my RB2. You can back up the tool, try and figure out where you went wrong. Maybe change a couple of picks. Now, obviously that's not how your actual draft is going to look. But again, for the purposes of figuring out what are the expectations? What can you really expect to see in these different pockets of the draft? This tool will allow you to do that. So you can kind of plan out an optimal strategy or an optimal path for you to build a solid squad.
And guess what? This is a 2 wide receiver league that we're currently simulating. And I feel better, Chris, having done that and realize, oh crap, Antonio Gibson's my RB2. That's a mistake. I don't want that. So hopefully when I'm doing a real life ESPN draft, I will learn from those mistakes and go from there. And yeah, I did get the, what if message that, if we had taken Bijan Robinson instead of Tyreek Hill in round 1, guess what? We would have gotten an A+ draft instead of a B draft. So again, really do just appreciate the opportunity to learn from our mistakes without putting up the dollars. Because again, you want to learn from a bad draft in July, not in late August when it actually counts. But guys, another really good way to go ahead and try to just get some reps in is by going over to DraftKings. People, their best ball business is absolutely spectacular. And you can find myself and Dre McFarland going through a draft each and every Friday, exactly where you are listening to us right now on YouTube. So great stuff there, but that's not all. We really have some great betting opportunities, specifically with the UFC card coming up this weekend. UFC 304 headline with the rematch between Leon Edwards and Bilal. Remember the name Muhammad, which is hilarious because no one typically remembers his name because he's quite a boring fighter if we had to, be objective about it. But yeah, Tom Aspinall, Curtis Blades in the co-main event. That's going to be an absolute banger. One of those men is getting finished. Now, last time they fought, Tom Aspinall sadly blew out his knee almost immediately, but, just seems like the most complete grappler and not even grappler, just most complete fighter in the heavyweight division. Would really, really love to see, Tom Aspinall get a chance at at John Jones eventually. Jerry Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Take my money for that murder that would happen inside the octagon. But yeah, Aspinall, JBJ, a man can dream. Bobby Green, Patty Pimblett. We even got Arnold Allen versus Giga Chikadze going in early on. That is going to be another very, very cool fight. So very much looking at this one. And yeah, guys, if you want to go ahead and bet on it, check out our partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet $5 will instantly get $150 in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FantasyLife. Remember, the crown is yours. All right, Chris, we're going to do one more mock draft, this time relying on more of a late round, just quarterback strategies. So we'll get things started again. But I would say, we'll wait round 10 because looking at the ADP options, we see guys like Caleb Williams, Aaron Rodgers, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, and Trevor Lawrence all being available after the top 120 picks. So that's a lot of pretty good names. And I think it's a reality that you see in some of these, ESPN and home leagues where this isn't best ball. This is redraft, where when you get your quarterback, and especially if they're a really good one, you don't really feel the need to get a second one right away. And accordingly, I think guys that are, again, not overly, like when we make our ranks, I don't think we certainly look at someone like Jared Goff and Brock Purdy as being 50 picks apart necessarily. But when you already have those early quarterbacks, you see guys like Goff dropping because guess what? People already have their quarterback.
Right. And I think that's the thing to think about, is that you just shouldn't really feel pressed in order to like snatch a guy up. If you wind up with your strength at that point is the rest of your roster. Let's assume you've got, let's say, a top end wide receiver or a top end running back. Like you took that detour at elite tight end. You've got your Mark Andrews. You've got your Dalton Kincaid. I mean, there are no other holes in your roster. So really, you just need a quarterback that's going to get you by. Now, of course, you want a guy that can give you those spike weeks. And of course, now with the Konami code being such a more prevalent part of how we draft, you're probably not going to find a guy that has that rushing upside. There might be a few guys that are available, Caleb Williams, maybe some Will Levis in there or whomever. But like those are but you don't have to rely on that in order to get your roster into the playoffs. You have your strength of like your team, but also depth along your bench at each of the core positions. So if you wind up getting an Aaron Rodgers, who actually I wrote up as a sleeper in the Fantasy Life magazine, go ahead and check that out if you're ever in a store that happens to carry it, or like even like the Will Levis that I just mentioned, like those guys that can potentially give you those spike weeks. But if you're just looking at like 14, 15, 16 points, like somewhere in there. But everything else is solid. Everything else is gold, from Bijan Robinson in the early parts to getting like one of those elite tight ends like in the middle rounds, and all your wide receivers in between. Like you just need a quarterback that's going to provide you, let's say, top 12-ish upside or around there. And most of those guys you can find like in the late rounds can do that for you.
Currently chugging along here through, let's see, 6 rounds. I've got Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, added Tony Pollard from the RB room as well. Not going down the Antonio Gibson route again, Chris. Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson. Yeah, exactly. Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, rounding out a pretty freaking solid wide receiver room, if I do say so myself. Yeah. And Jake Ferguson, at tight end, which I'm feeling pretty good about. So at this point in the draft, we're in round 8. Jaden Daniels is the top quarterback. But again, we're going to keep pushing. We're going to build up some of that depth at our other positions and rely on the chance of getting, again, some just cheaper quarterbacks and, playing the game where at this point we would be taking 2 of them later. So getting Christian Kirk this late in the draft is a treat. We're going to go 2 more. I see Roma Dunze there. Sign me up as my wide receiver 5 in round freaking 8. That'll work. And then we'll go 1 more running back before we get finally to our quarterbacks. Okay, now we're round 10 at this point. So round 10, still have Jaden Daniels. Let's push it even more, man. Well, okay, Antonio Gibson's staring at me. I don't want to keep drafting this dude. Already hurting me enough. So you know what? Jaden Daniels,
saw the name and you were like, oh, man.
Jaden Daniels, what do you think, Chris? Caleb, T-Law?
I'm sold. Because we already talked about like the lack of rushing upside for a lot of the late round quarterbacks, and Jaden Daniels with his, I don't know, Johnny Knoxville impression anytime he gets on the field, especially when he was in college. I think he's fine for where we're at.
It's a good demonstration about how bad my second draft was, because guess what? Jaden Daniels on ESPN falls to pick 118. He truly is a late round quarterback in this format. And so for these purposes, because we didn't use a bunch of draft capital, maybe you guys are a little wary of Jaden Daniels. Okay, then let's go ahead and add, a lot of people hate Trevor Lawrence. Let's add the NFL's reigning passing leader, Tua Tagovailoa to the squad and see what happens there. I know I'm in one ESPN league where it's 5 points per passing touchdown. So if you are in that format, that is where things get a bit better. Help round out the RB room with an underrated handcuff, in my opinion, in Chuba Hubbard, especially with Jonathan Brooks likely not necessarily missing early season time, but I'd be surprised if they're, just all wheels go early on. So got Jake Ferguson as the tight end. Don't necessarily feel like we need another one. I see my guy Curtis Samuel available in the last round. So let's go ahead and get
Curtis
that
Samuel
done.
And Joe Brady. Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. Only went for over 1,000 total yards the last time they were out there. So not too shabby at all. So once again, grading the draft, and I feel best about this.
Better be
one.
A+.
We'll see. I know, man. We'll see what the AI tells me. A+ overall grade.
Go.
We got there. We got there, Chris. So again, projected standings. As you can see, was able to get the wide receiver loaded. Tight end 11th, but that's probably more so because we didn't take a second one. I'm not too worried about that ranking. And RB 12. So, what if I had taken Jordan Love in round 7 instead of Tony Pollard? I would still have gotten an A+. So, just a little semantics there. But if anything, man, it would have been cooler to have more of a pure locked in RB1 with, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery leading the way. But this late round scene, I guess the argument, my big takeaway from doing these, Chris, is that as much as I preferred middle round quarterback and some of the, more best ball formats that I've been firing at with ESPN and with, redraft and a lot of things we talked about where we see the middle round quarterbacks just naturally get pushed down because of the nature of it. Hey, I know we're not the first people to say late round QB is a pretty good idea, but it seems like in 2024, Chris, it might just be a better idea than ever.
Right. And I think one of the biggest things that drafters now want to try and take into account is that they want those QB1 spike weeks. They want the Lamar Jacksons. They want the Josh Allens. They want all the stuff that comes with it. But again, going back to opportunity cost, what are you giving up by drafting those guys early? And from what we can see, you're giving up legitimate like RB2s, RB1s, like in that range. You're passing up on solid wide receiver 2s or even elite tight ends in order to get those guys that are going to score you points. In the end, can you still come up with a viable roster by having Jaden Daniels or Aaron Rodgers or maybe Will Levis, but that's probably a little bit lesser. But like any of those guys that are going to fall into the late round based off of using this tool, the answer is yes. So if I can do that, if things don't break my way, if you get stuck on like closer to the turn and there's a massive, let's say, quarterback run and you miss out on that tier of quarterbacks, then you can still push it. It's still viable for you to push quarterback into the later rounds. And like going through these mock drafts, going through these practice runs and doing it allows you to see how that is possible. Don't take our word for it. Try it out yourself and see like how you can build out a team that even if you miss out on the guys that you really want, you can wind up having a team that can contend like for at least the playoffs, if not like take down your entire crew.
And again, that was just redraft, but we also gave you the options to go ahead and do a mock draft for best ball or even dynasty, Chris, which again, very hard out there to get, good live reps with dynasty. Some of the ADPs are a bit wonky. Again, I know it's our company. Of course, we're going to say nice things about it, but we just showed you it, guys. It really is a cool tool, and we invite you to go check that out on FantasyLife.com. So fun episode. Guess what? We'll be back tomorrow because the Fantasy Life show stops for nobody Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Myself and Dwayne McFarland on the Thursday edition talking quarterback tiers, so make sure you guys don't miss that one. Chris, see you next week, my friends. So for Chris, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show, and until next time, take care, everybody.